Hey, Claire.
Hi, Zoe.
Good morning. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Birthday. How exciting.
Yes, I'm quite ancient, now 38, but
Wow.
that's okay.
And you look amazing. And
Thank you.
you look amazing considering your age, which isn't old at all. But when we talk about intrasexual competition between females, age does matter, doesn't it?
Yeah, so at the age of 38, I am starting to, well, in this day and age, because of technology, it's much easier to preserve one's looks. However, in the past, 38 would be considered quite old. I would be, if I was to be pregnant now, I'd have a geriatric pregnancy. Thankfully, I had my children a while ago, so that's not an issue. But yeah, one of the issues for women is that we do age and we lose what we would call a valuable resource in the sexual marketplace. And you mentioned that term, intrasexual female competition. It's an interesting thing to discuss because women compete with each other in interesting and often covert ways, and we don't really talk about it very much in mainstream society. It sort of flies under the radar, and we sort of pretend that women don't compete with each other, but we are competing with each other all the time.
Yep.
And it's sort of interesting how we don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm. And I think we should talk about it because a lot of the feelings that it generates, you know, it might be jealousy or anger or sadness or insecurity. We feel those all the time and we don't realize why.
Yeah.
And I think the moment I started, I realized that it was just a lot of it was to do with competition, intrasexual competition, and that I had very little control over it.
Yeah.
It made me feel so much better.
Yeah, I mean, you touch upon something that's actually quite profound, and that is beauty privilege or attractiveness privilege. And I would argue that it's like a far greater privilege to be born attractive than it is to be born even well. Like if you're a woman, it's probably a greater privilege to be born with the genes that allow you to develop an attractive phenotype than it is to be born wealthy.
For sure, yeah.
It's up there with intelligence as being like one of the biggest privileges that you can potentially be given or just be born with, because these traits that we're talking about are heritable. I mean, if you have attractive parents, you're likely to be an attractive child. And we know that attractive people are given all sorts of opportunities in life, whether it's job interviews, job opportunities, being treated more positively by the opposite sex, even by the same sex. Like there are all sorts of doors that open for people because of their attractiveness. And yet we focus on these other privileges such as skin color, which may also be privileges, but potentially not quite as profound as beauty. And it's interesting how what I would say the two most profound gifts that you can be given and are completely out of your control are beauty and intelligence. It's interesting how we don't really talk about them.
Yeah, it's a taboo to talk about beauty privilege, I think, especially for women perhaps, because for women it's even more of a superpower, I would say. I mean, you know, physically attractive men, they also have a bit of a superpower, but it's not as powerful as female physical beauty.
And you can be born into poverty as a man, and if you have enough grit and determination and savvy, you can become wealthy. You cannot necessarily be born heinous and make yourself beautiful. I mean, maybe with technology that can happen now, but I would say it's a less easy path.
Yeah. And
so it's tragic. It's really quite tragic. And so that's potentially one reason why we don't talk about it.
So a lot of guys who are sort of into the red pill manosphere scene, they they, not all the time, but sometimes they have this resentment towards beautiful women because they believe that, those women haven't earned their beauty.
Yeah.
And that it's easier to make yourself more beautiful. It's easier to do that than for a man to make himself either richer or more successful.
Yeah, well, I would say it's the opposite. I would say it's easier to make money than it is to change your facial structure.
Which takes a lot of money too.
Yeah, and I think I don't know about those. I think that they have some issue with women wearing makeup or something, and it's
Exactly,
like,
enhancing. Yeah.
but often the people who criticize women for flaunting their looks are other women.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's something I wanted to talk about today because over the weekend or the past week there's been a lot of discourse. A writer, Meghan Murphy, posted something on her Substack. Unfortunately, I couldn't read the whole thing because it's paywalled. But she was, I guess, kind enough or generous enough to talk a lot about it on Twitter.
Yeah.
And her point pretty much is that women who thirst trap, which is
Posting sexy photos.
which we both have some experience with, that thirst trapping is, I think she described it as embarrassing, and shows that a woman lacks confidence. And probably the easiest way for a woman to get attention, and therefore that's a bad thing because it's like a cheap way of getting attention.
Right.
So, yeah, I got involved in a bit of that
And you disagree
discourse.
with that.
Yeah. And, I've changed my mind a lot on this topic. I sort of, ever since I was, I guess, a teenager, coming into my sexuality and starting to understand the power of my sexuality or womanhood, I've always found it, there's been a tension.
Right.
And I remember crying to my dad about this at around the age of like 15 or 14.
I've got this superpower and I don't know how to use it.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, Dad, like I feel I'm celebrated because of the way I look. So I'm encouraged to flaunt that. But at the same time, there's this shame and, slut shaming essentially. And I was slut shamed a lot as a teenager.
And was it from boys or girls?
Mostly girls.
Yeah.
Boys too during high school. But that slut shaming from boys pretty much stopped at age like when I got into uni. You could argue that I still see a bit of it online. Yeah. For sure, from adult men.
Yeah.
But the day-to-day slut shaming, which is more covert, I receive a lot more from women. Yeah. And I'm sure you have some experience with that as well.
Yeah. I did post a photo of myself in a bikini when I was in Hawaii, not Christmas just been, but the Christmas before. So it was a little while ago. And, the response was overwhelmingly positive. But
no surprises there.
I do remember one Quillette writer, actually, a female writer, saying, this reflects poorly on the publication.
How interesting.
And it was really trying to shame me. And I did feel ashamed when I read the comment. And I actually did think, oh, geez, I should not have posted this photo. Women shaming other women is, I would argue, quite effective.
Yep, it works.
And when women tell you that, it's beneath you or you somehow denigrating your intellect by flaunting your body, it does sting. I do move on from those comments pretty quickly though, because as you would know, when you get older and when you're my age in your late 30s, having a physique that you want to show off is quite deliberate. Like, you do have to work for it. It's not an accident that you get a nice figure. So, this idea that it's easy to be fit or to have a physique that you want to show off it's just false.
Yeah.
It might be the case when you're 18. It's like pretty easy to have a svelte figure when you're 18, but not when you're 38, and probably not even when you're 28.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the point is that you're not just showing off your physique for sexual reasons. You're showing off the hard work that you've put into your body.
Exactly.
And people who do spend, you know, a significant chunk of their time going to the gym or working out or eating well, I mean, they have every right to display what they've put work into, just as the man who is working 60 or 80-hour weeks in the finance industry has every right to buy a Lamborghini to flaunt his wealth. I mean, it's just a different – if you're focusing on your health and fitness, you're trading off time that you could be spending doing other things, and there's, you know, you're just displaying that.
So true. I mean, I've been dancing since I was a kid, and obviously dancing was just fun for me. But as I got older, you know, I quit competitive ballet when I was like 17 or 16, and I replaced it with a gym. And yeah, there was an hour, a time, especially during COVID, where I was spending like an hour a day, 5 or 6 days a week in the gym.
Yeah.
And yes, I love it. Obviously, it's really good for my mental health, and I love the feeling of being strong. But yeah, of course, I know that it improves my status. Let's be clinical about it. Like, it makes my value heightened.
Yeah. But it's not just mate value. I mean, I'm an employer, and you know, if someone's applying for a job, and they have fitness as a hobby or an interest, I mean, that's a sign of conscientiousness. It's a sign of discipline. It's a good signal of the type of personality trait that you want when you are an employer. So I mean, just beauty is one thing, but it's also a reflection of character, I would say.
Definitely. So when women shame other women for their sexy photos or the way they flaunt their body, what they're really doing, wouldn't you say, is that they're cutting down, they're aiming to cut down that woman's status to equal it a little bit more with hers, so that there's not such a discrepancy, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know the answer, but there are different theories. And there's a really interesting theory that was put forward by Roy Baumeister and Kathleen Vohs. They published a paper back in 2004 called Sexual Economics, Sex as Female Resource for Social Exchange in Heterosexual Interactions. Their thesis was that imagine the sexual world as a marketplace. Men are the buyers and women are the sellers.
That's triggered most people, just that alone.
It's a theory. It's not, you know, they're not saying that this is the iron law of the universe. It's a theory. And so women are the sellers, men are the buyers. And in any marketplace, if you flood the market with a particular product, it reduces the price. So like if I'm a cocaine dealer and some new dealer comes in and floods Sydney with coke, it reduces the price, and maybe I can only get, you know, I can only sell my wares for $20 a pop when I used to be able to sell it for $200. I don't know how much it sells for, but you get what I mean.
Yeah.
When you flood the market, each individual seller can't command a high price. And so the theory of sexual economics is that if sex is a resource, a female resource, women who give away sex too easily or too quickly reduce the price for all women because they flood the marketplace. And so the idea that there is a theory that it's women engage in slut shaming because they want to raise the price for all women. They want men to respect women and enter into long-term relationships. They want men to respect women for their intellectual achievements and so on and so forth. And so they see women flaunting their bodies and, you know, giving away sex or whatever as harming women by reducing the price. And I think that's pretty plausible sounding theory. And it also explains why women do a lot of slut shaming, not just in our culture, but if in more traditional cultures, you'll often find it's the mothers or the grandmothers who police the behaviour of younger women.
Definitely.
I think in African cultures, it was the women, the grandmothers, who would get the younger girls in for the female genital mutilation.
Yeah.
Which is horrible when you think about it. But this idea that women don't police each other is just wrong. We clearly do.
Definitely.
And we do it in interesting and in fascinating ways that aren't always easily explainable.
Exactly.
Without some theory behind it.
Yeah. And I think men often just don't even perceive these interactions. Because women's communication is so covert, and a lot of it is just done through, a look or a tone of voice or a small behaviour or action. And for men, it's just well, we know in children that competition between boys is quite physical. So bullying is often physical bullying, and boys will, on the football field, they'll punch each other and whatever. When girls are engaging in bullying, they do it through covert methods. So they will if there's a girl they don't like, they will freeze her out of the group. I'm sure that's happened to you. It certainly happened to me. Yeah, I've perpetrated it and received it.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the way it goes.
It's that freezing out, the cold shoulder, pretending that girl isn't really there and she's like right there, ignoring them. That's how girls bully. And you're right, it can fly under the radar because it's covert in its very nature.
And I think as adults, it might be, not explicit slut shaming, not saying, oh, look at what Claire's wearing today, she's such a slut, but saying, oh, have you noticed Claire wears, short skirt, or, oh, that's a very revealing top, Claire, know, and they sort of spread, Claire was talking very closely with that man at the water cooler, blah, blah, blah.
Sabotaging another woman's reputation. I've done that in my past. Yeah, I have to admit it. I did sabotage.
We all have.
Yeah, I did sabotage someone's reputation. It was bad. I felt guilty about it. It's just, it happens.
As like a young adult or older adult?
Would have been in my 20s.
Yeah. Do you think once you got married and had kids, your behaviour changed regarding?
Yeah, so there's less at stake. I'm not in competition anymore.
Yeah. So
I don't have to compete. Not in direct competition anyway. And there's I'm not in environments where there's intense. When I did sabotage someone's reputation, I didn't sabotage it. They actually were engaging in deceptive conduct and I just told someone. That's all I did. But, there was competition and we were all single and we were all competing over like the most eligible bachelors in the particular town that I was in. And, so it was high stakes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, we were talking about this before. Let's just be honest that every action, every word we say, everything we post online is for we want to signal something or we want to achieve something, whether it's posting a bikini shot or posting a link to an essay you've written. You're still signaling something about yourself. So why is the signaling that you're physically attractive?
Yeah.
Why does that reflect more poorly on you than reflecting that you're intelligent, which is heritable as well?
Yeah. Well, everything that we broadcast is being broadcast for a reason, and usually it's to attract resources or mates. And so you're absolutely right. If I write an op-ed and I broadcast it online, I'm generally doing that to attract attention. And, I as I mentioned before, intelligence is another privilege that we don't necessarily have any control over. I mean, I might have some control over my education, but I certainly did not tell my parents to give me a particular IQ before I was born. And so when we judge people for broadcasting things that, you know, when we judge people for broadcasting things that are not necessarily intellectual, we're sort of being smug and snobbish when people who are intelligent or intellectual and can broadcast things like essays they've written or films they've made or songs they've composed. Well, I mean, you've got those talents, but not everybody has those talents. And maybe people with a beautiful physique or who are good at boxing or who are good at sport, maybe they have a right to broadcast what they're good at too.
Yeah, or good at bikini yoga.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, you know, just the judgment is a little bit, like, I do think it's a bit snobbish.
Yeah.
And, you know, everyone has something, right? Even if you're not beautiful, maybe have a wicked sense of humour.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hold that against you for broadcasting that.
Yeah.
We've got to just flaunt what we've been given.
Exactly.
Really.
Yeah. And at the same time, you know, life is unfair. Human nature is cruel, and some people are born with more traits that are, you know,
that are socially desirable than others.
Yeah. And that really hurts some people, including me. You know, it's painful. I wish I was better at lots of things. And even if you're, you know, attractive, you know, you always wish you were more attractive or, you know.
Yeah. It's like people who are wealthy always wish they were more wealthy. Yeah, it's just part of human nature to strive, and it's our instinct to be competitive. I think one important thing to remember is the limits of competition. So we can get carried away with competition. You can see it on Instagram with women or girls overdoing the facial filler because they're in competition and they start to look like cartoon faces, right?
Bigger is better.
You have these sort of hyper real, hyper normal faces where the traits that are attractive, so like large lips and full cheeks, have been enhanced through injections, but to the point where they no longer look normal, and that is now an aesthetic that is sought out. And so that's what, in evolutionary terms, that's called a runaway effect, Fisherian runaway effect. So you get in species like the peacock, where you get sexual selection for certain traits. One sex can just like get carried away and develop these extreme traits like the peacock's tail. And it happens in all sorts of different species. But you can so men and women in their competition within their own sex can get carried away and be so obsessed with competition with each other that they sort of even forget what's attractive to the opposite sex. So there's been a lot of girls who are getting all of the work done on their faces who have forgotten that actually this is maybe not attractive to men, but because they want to compete with the other influencer or the other girl with the huge lips, they want to outdo her. And so it's important, I think, to remember that we all have competitive natures. Sometimes we can get carried away with that instinct for competition. And I think it's important to remember what we're competing for.
Which is, for women, resources, I suppose.
Well, I mean,
status.
I think what we compete for is a personal choice, ultimately. I mean, we are hardwired to compete for mates and resources just to survive and to pass on our genes. But we can decide not to compete for those things if we don't want to. I mean, once we get married, we don't have to compete for mates anymore, and we can choose to compete. Well, I compete for resources, but you can compete for the resources that you want. So it might be that you want to compete for more free time, or you might want to compete for wealth, or you might want to compete for, status just among your local peers, your individual friendship group. I mean, we can choose what we want to focus on and compete for. We don't just have to let our monkey brains take over.
Exactly.
We can inhibit our instincts.
Yeah. And even once you're in a relationship, you still need to maintain the happiness, the attraction from your partner. So for men, that might be, like, I'm pretty sure a big predictor for divorce is once the woman starts out earning the man, or perhaps the man has a big knock to his status from losing his job or something like that, that really shakes up a dynamic. I know that weight loss as well for both partners can really shake up a relationship. In my experience, just from what I've seen, if a man marries a woman or gets with a woman when she's a bit bigger, that obviously affects her status. And then she loses all this weight, gets really into CrossFit, goes on a diet, and becomes
dumps him.
More attractive. From what I've seen, I can think of it happening in about 2 relationships. It's not necessarily that she dumps him, but there's a tension. He probably starts to get a bit more concerned about, maybe he gets a bit more controlling. He's not used to her mate value being so high. And she starts to get a bit pissed with that, and then can really...
It's probably also a predictor of domestic violence, actually, when there's... So most relationships do well when each person has basically equivalent mate value. So 6 pairs with a 6, 7 pairs with a 7. I mean, these numbers are obviously crude, and there's all sorts of factors that go into mate value. And it's also like highly subjective. I mean, I might be very low in mate value to someone who wants a particular type of woman, but very high to someone else. I mean, we understand all of that. But
generally speaking,
in general, you want to be fairly matched up. And you would think that if a woman gains mate value by losing a lot of weight, that's a threat to the male, because it's the threat to the stability of the relationship, and that would probably predict domestic violence. It might also happen the other way around as well.
What else did I want to talk about? There was something else here. How I wanted to talk about how women objectify themselves, because that was a thread throughout this sort of women thirst trapping, and that, showing a lack of confidence or respect in themselves. Another argument is that women just have more of an exhibitionist side to them. They sort of want to be objectified, and that men want to objectify.
I mean, and there's got to be a lot of variation. I mean, some women are going to be more exhibitionist than others, but I do think it's really interesting how the male gaze is considered to be this oppressive product of the patriarchy, when, as you and I both know, the male gaze is often a power used by women to exploit men and to oppress men. The oppression goes the other way. I mean, it's not women who are spending hours every day watching pornography and spending, billions of dollars on OnlyFans. The money flows in the other direction. It's going to the women. So, who's oppressing whom?
Great point.
Yeah.
And what about the desire, or the sort of positive side of women as a woman being objectified?
I've reflected at moments when feeling the most desirable, that the idea that you are objectified is actually quite pleasurable. And I've thought that the idea of being objectified is part of my sexuality, and I've wondered if that might be generalizable to other women. I mean, we know that there are conditions like autogynephilia where men dress up as women and enjoy the idea of being women. So why can't women dress up as women and enjoy being women? Do you know what I mean? Like it's part of your sexual experience.
Yeah, it's crossed my mind lately that recently that female sexuality is a bit autogynephilic. In that you want to be pursued, you want to be objectified to some extent. Obviously, like there's so much context. Boundaries can be easily crossed when someone objectifies you who you don't want to, But yeah, it's very interesting.
But it does run against the mainstream view, which is that women hate being objectified.
Exactly.
And it's the worst thing in the world. And, we all want to be these sexless creatures, completely devoid of any kind of... It's just not true.
Yeah, it's not true at all. And if you just see the way that most of the women who believe that, if you just see the way that they present themselves to the world, you can see that that's not really true, because they'll still make themselves look physically attractive. They'll wear...
Well, I think there's a lot of self-deception going on. I don't think, I think women who are looking after their appearance and then who are complaining about the male gaze are not necessarily lying, but they might just be deceiving themselves as to what's going on. And I think as humans, we're remarkably good at lying to ourselves. And, we... Like I don't know if women do it more than men, but I think we're very good at deceiving ourselves, like what is the real motivation of our behavior. I mean, men who are slaving away at the bank, working 80 hours a week, I mean, who knows what stories they tell themselves as to why they're actually doing it, when if you really want to dig deep down into it, it's they're competing for resources and mates. I mean,
and it'd be great if we could be more upfront with if people knew themselves better or knew the science better, because it makes me think about topics we've talked about in previous discussions about sexual assault and how women, how we can sort of protect ourselves in the world and take instead of seeing ourselves as victims, take ownership of how we move through the world. I've talked about it before, but, when I wear a short skirt and a low-cut top, I know what I'm doing. Like, yes, it might be hot, but I know I walk out the door knowing that will attract attention. And, while I'm comfortable doing that in Bondi, I wouldn't do it on the Paris Metro. I wouldn't do it in Morocco, So
well, the way I view it is that knowledge is power. And with human behavior, having more knowledge about human behavior gives us more power. And so that when I was in my 20s, I spent a lot of time reading theories of human behavior, and there are competing theories. Obviously, feminist theories of human behavior are in tension with evolutionary psychology theories. And I'm not going to advocate that we just rely on one theory at the exclusion of all others. Usually our knowledge is enhanced if we read different competing theories. And so I think women in general have been let down by the lack of education about human behavior, and that particularly just understanding some basics of evolutionary psychology helps us guide our own behavior towards goals that suit us, over the long term. So there's just so many positive benefits we can get from reading theories, from reading studies, from reading literature, but unfortunately that's not really the norm. A lot of people are just informed by what they read in magazines or what they see on TV, which is not necessarily
On Instagram.
not necessarily an empirical, analytical view of how the world works, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a shame that instead of learning, about neutrally learning about the science of it, that's been replaced with a political ideology or various ideologies, whether it's super conservative and women should never show their body because this, that. Or the whole world is seen through, it's a patriarchy and any man who, comes up to you says you're attractive, that's, something shameful.
Yeah. People have a hard time, whether they're left or right wing, people have a hard time separating sex out from morality. And to have a rational view of these issues, it's actually quite important to be able to decouple what is actually happening in the real world from what ought, from what ought to be. So if you study a topic like sexual assault, if you're a good scientist, you want to just study what actually happens without flying into hysterics or flying into outrage just from looking at the data. You have to be able to decouple observations of the empirical world from your own moral feelings. And you see it both among conservatives and also among progressives that they're just incapable of separating out human behavior, particularly around sex, from their moral feelings about it. So they're just not able to see from an objective point of view behavior that might have some rational basis. Like if women are posting sexy selfies, maybe that has some rational basis if women are competing for resources in a highly economically unequal environment, right? That might make sense for them. But conservatives will just be triggered by the reality of female sexuality and condemn it. And similarly, feminists will do something similar, right?
Exactly.
So that you get this horseshoe effect where the more political you are, the more you moralize about these issues, and the more your view of reality is sort of clouded by your feelings.
Yeah. And I mean, we do see similar things happen. Like, I think people get very worked up about food as well, which is another basic need. Food becomes very political, veganism, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And other, basic human needs do.
Is sleep political?
Pardon?
Is sleep political?
Yeah, true. Sleep's not one. But food can be, but it's sex. It just really gets to people, and as you were saying, it's so difficult to uncouple. And I just wonder if it is perhaps the most powerful urge inside us.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because so much of our sexual behavior is biologically driven, but it's also shaped by culture. So it's one of these really interesting nature-nurture sort of intersections where, obviously our urges to have sex are biologically based, but the way we express our sexual behavior is very culturally mediated. So, and I think, the fight between conservatives and progressives is how we express that behavior, how we channel it. And, I think there are some valid arguments for restrictions on hypersexual behavior because, when children get involved, you want to have stable environments for children to be raised in. So you don't want people just going out and having orgies left, right and centre. You do actually want to control things and have stable family structures. So I do actually think the conservatives have a valid point around all of that. At the same time, I'm a woman and I don't they can go way too far when it comes to policing women's sexuality for sure.
And despite my own personal beliefs in the way I live my life, I find Mary Harrington really interesting, for example. I don't agree with everything she says, but I find her work really interesting. And just the fact that, religions throughout, the whole of human existence, religions have put restrictions on sex. Yeah. And I think that says something about just how powerful it is.
Definitely. And there have always been restrictions on female sexuality, and someone like Louise Perry would say that that's often for women's own benefit, and I would say that she's probably right there. And I wouldn't go so far as saying that the sexual revolution was a mistake, but certainly I think that there are women can be affected by norms and sort of trends that aren't necessarily healthy. And what I advocate for is just knowledge. I mean, like the theories are there, whether it's a theory of sexual economics or evolutionary psychology theories around mating. They they explain a lot. And if there was more widespread mainstream understanding of these theories, I think that people would be able to make choices that are more in line with their long-term goals.
I agree. Yep. Okay, I think on that note,
we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. Until
good to chat.
Yeah. Great chat today.
Don't stop posting those sexy selfies.
No, you too. Let's keep going. Okay,
right.
Bye-bye.